Hi, everyone. Let me start with a question. How does a country once praised as a model of stability, fairness, and social balance find itself in the grip of an economic crisis that threatens the very fabric of its society? I'm talking, of course, about New Zealand, a nation that not long ago was held up as a success story of globalization and neoliberal reform. But now the headlines read quite differently. Inflation soaring, housing unaffordable, wages stagnant, and young people leaving for better opportunities abroad. So what happened? Why is an economy that seems so promising now cracking under its own weight? Let's pull back the curtain and take a closer look. Let's begin with a simple but powerful truth. As economic crises are not natural disasters, they are human-made. They do not appear out of thin air, nor do they descend upon societies like an unexpected storm. They are built brick by the deliberate decisions of those in power, the policymakers, the corporations, and the financial elites who structure the system to serve their own interests. And here's the hopeful part. If an economic system can be designed, it can also be redesigned. That means change is not only possible, it is inevitable if enough people demand it. Now imagine for a moment that every time you hear the word crisis, you stop and ask a simple question. Who created it and who benefits from it? Because behind every economic downturn, every wave of unemployment, every surge in inflation, there are hands steering the ship. They tell us it's a market correction, a global trend, or unfortunate timing. But these are just polite ways of hiding responsibility. When banks speculate and collapse, when housing prices soar beyond reach, when wages stagnate while profits rise, these are not accidents. They are the predictable outcomes of an economic model that rewards greed and punishes restraint. That realization should not leave you hopeless. It should make you powerful, because once you recognize that crises are created, you stop seeing them as fate. You start seeing them as systems that can be changed. History is full of moments when ordinary people refused to accept economic suffering as destiny. Think of the labor movements that fought for the 8-hour workday, the civil rights movements that demanded economic equality, or the cooperatives that grew from working-class communities who refused to be crushed by corporate power. Change did not come because the elites had a change of heart. It came because people learned to connect the dots between their struggles and the system that caused them. Look at New Zealand today. Many are asking, why is the economy crashing? Inflation, rising costs, unaffordable housing, all symptoms of a deeper problem. But to understand the disease, we must look beyond the headlines. For decades, New Zealand followed the neoliberal playbook: privatize public assets, weaken labor unions, let the market decide everything. They said it would bring prosperity. For some, it did. But for most, it brought insecurity, debt, and exhaustion. That's not a natural disaster. That's a policy choice. And if those policies were choices, they can be unchosen. Here's a hook to remember. What's made by human hands can be unmade by human hands. The market is not a god. It is a human invention, a tool. And like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. When it's used to enrich the few, it devastates the many. But when it's guided by fairness, cooperation, and shared purpose, it can lift entire communities out of hardship. The power lies not in the invisible hand of the market, but in the visible hands of workers, teachers, caregivers, and citizens who make the economy function every single day. So let's stop talking about crashes as if they are earthquakes. An earthquake can't be prevented, but a housing bubble can. A drought can't be avoided, but an unfair tax system can be restructured. The real danger is not the crisis itself. It's the belief that we are powerless to stop it. That belief is what keeps people obedient, quiet, and resigned. And that's precisely what those at the top want. Because as long as you think the system is natural, you will never challenge it. But you are not powerless. You are part of the majority that keeps the system alive. And therefore you have the power to change it. When workers organize, when communities demand accountability, when people reject the myths that justify inequality, the very foundations of the system begin to shake. Change doesn't begin in boardrooms. It begins in conversations, in classrooms, in neighborhoods where people start to realize that the economy is not something happening to them. It's something they can shape. So the next time someone tells you that's just how the economy works, remember this. Every rule of the economy was written by someone. And if those rules no longer serve the people, it's time to write new ones. Crises are not destiny. They are designed. And when enough of us see that truth, when enough of us refuse to accept the unacceptable, that's when real transformation begins. Because the most radical idea in economics is also the simplest. Whereas we made this system and we can make it better. Power is a word often misunderstood. We are told that power lives in government offices and corporate towers in the hands of billionaires who supposedly run the economy. But the truth, and it's a truth capitalism works hard to conceal, is that as real power lies with the people who make the world function every single day. You, the worker, the teacher, the builder, the nurse, the driver. You are the living engine of the economy. Without your labor, nothing moves, nothing grows, nothing profits. The moment you understand that you stop seeing yourself as powerless and start recognizing the extraordinary influence you already hold. Let's look closely at this illusion of powerlessness. The system has spent decades convincing workers that they are lucky just to have a job, that they should be grateful, not demanding, that if they struggle financially, it's their own fault, not the fault of an economy rigged in favor of the few. This psychological manipulation is one of capitalism's greatest achievements, to make those who create all the wealth believe they have none of the power. It's like convincing a farmer that the field belongs to the seed rather than to the one who tills it. Here's the hook. It says the economy isn't something happening above you. It's something happening through you. Every hour you work, every service you provide, every idea you contribute, that's the economy. It's not abstract, it's human. The so-called captains of industry can't run their ships without the crew. The leaders of finance can't earn a dollar without the people whose labor turns that dollar into profit. You are not a small part of the system. You are the system. And that means you have far more leverage than you've been led to believe. Think about what happens when workers unite, even briefly. When nurses strike, hospitals stop. When transport workers walk out, cities slow to a crawl. When teachers stand together, classrooms fall silent, and governments take notice. These moments expose a truth that the elite would rather you forget. When those at the bottom stand together, the top trembles. That's not theory, that's history. Every major gain in workers' rights, from fair wages to safer workplaces to paid leave, was not gifted from above. It was taken from below by people who realized their collective strength. Now in New Zealand and beyond, that realization is more important than ever. As the cost of living rises and wages stagnate, people are being pushed to their limits. But desperation can also be the birthplace of empowerment. The cracks in the system are not just signs of failure. They are openings for change. When individuals stop blaming themselves for systemic problems and start connecting their personal struggles to a shared cause, something powerful begins to happen. Solidarity. And solidarity is the foundation of every successful movement for justice in history. The truth is the ruling class depends on your disbelief. They need you to feel isolated, to think your voice doesn't matter, to see your neighbor as competition rather than as an ally. Because the moment you see through that illusion, you start asking dangerous questions like why profits soar while paychecks stagnate, or why the people doing the hardest work live the hardest lives. That's the moment the mask begins to slip and the real architecture of power becomes visible. Here's another hook to hold on to your heirs. The system needs you more than you need the system. Without workers, nothing is produced. Without consumers, nothing is sold. Without the people, there is no profit. Every strike, every protest, every act of resistance reminds those in charge that the foundation of their power rests on the cooperation of the many. And cooperation is something that can be withdrawn, redirected, or transformed into something far more democratic. So when someone tells you that's just the way things are, remember that this is exactly what those benefiting from the current arrangement want you to believe. They want resignation, not rebellion, silence, not solidarity. But the moment you begin to see yourself as the indispensable core of the economy, you reclaim the dignity and agency that capitalism tries to strip away. You begin to recognize that you are not at the mercy of the system. The system is at the mercy of your labor, your choices, your collective will. Power doesn't trickle down from the top. It rises up from below. It lives in every worker who refuses to accept exploitation as normal, in every citizen who demands accountability, in every community that organizes for fairness. The myth of powerlessness is the greatest lie ever sold. And the moment you stop buying it, you start building something new, an economy that serves the people who sustain it, not the elite who exploit it. And that awakening, that spark of awareness, is where every revolution, economic or otherwise, begins. One of the most paralyzing myths in modern society is the belief that change must come from above, that we must wait for politicians, corporations, or some powerful authority to fix the system. It's a comforting illusion, but it's also a dangerous one. Because when people wait for permission to act, they give away their greatest weapon: initiative. The truth, as history has shown time and again, is that meaningful transformation almost never begins with those who hold power. It begins with ordinary people who decide they've waited long enough. As say, you don't have to wait for the system to change. You can start building the alternative right now. Imagine if every community, every workplace, every neighborhood stopped asking for economic justice and started creating it. That is not a fantasy. It's a practical path forward. Around the world, we've seen workers form cooperatives, communities build local credit unions, and citizens take control of essential services that were once privatized. These are not acts of charity or rebellion for its own sake. They are examples of people reclaiming ownership over their own economic destiny. They prove that change doesn't begin with a law or a leader. It begins with a decision. The hook is this: our real power grows wherever people stop waiting and start building. Guys, think about it. Every powerful social movement in history began outside the official channels. The labor unions that fought for fair wages didn't wait for corporate boards to approve. They organized. The civil rights movement didn't wait for Congress to suddenly grow a conscience. They marched. The women's suffrage movement didn't wait for the political establishment to grant them rights. They demanded them. Change has always belonged to those who act first, not those who ask politely. In economic terms, that means communities must begin to create and control their own institutions. If the global economy prioritizes profit over people, then people must build local economies that prioritize well-being, fairness, and sustainability. This is where worker cooperatives, community-owned businesses, and participatory budgeting come in. These models flip the script. Instead of letting a handful of shareholders make all the decisions, they give every worker, every participant, a voice and a stake in the outcome. It's not just about fairness, it's about resilience. When people share control, they share responsibility. And that produces a kind of economic stability that capitalism, with its endless cycles of boom and bust, simply cannot deliver. New Zealand, like many nations, faces an opportunity disguised as a crisis. The current economic struggles, inflation, housing insecurity, and inequality expose the fragility of a system built on speculation and corporate power, but they also expose possibilities. When the old model begins to crack, space opens for something new to emerge. Instead of asking, when will the government fix this? The question should be, what can we build ourselves? Imagine communities owning their energy cooperatives, workers running the very industries they sustain, and citizens collectively shaping how resources are used. That is not utopia. That is economic democracy. Another hook worth holding on to the O. You cannot reform greed, but you can replace it. Do this waiting for greed to grow. A conscience is a losing game. You can't expect the same system that created inequality to suddenly correct it out of moral awakening. Capitalism will not collapse under the weight of its own injustice. It must be outgrown by something better, and that something better will not be handed down from a podium or a parliament. It will be built step by people who take back control of their work, their resources, and their communities. Starting small does not mean thinking small. Every local cooperative, every shared project, every community initiative that values people over profit is a seed of systemic change. Those seeds grow roots. They spread ideas. They inspire others. And soon, what once seemed like small experiments become movements that reshape nations. That's how revolutions happen. Quietly at first, then all at once, the old world begins to fade, not because it was overthrown in a single act, but because enough people stopped participating in it and started building something better. So when you hear the phrase economic reform, remember that reform often means rearranging the furniture in a burning house. What we need instead is reconstruction, not of the same house, but of a new one built on different foundations. And that building starts with action, not permission. Each act of collective ownership, each decision to create instead of complain, chips away at the old structure and lays a brick for the new. The message is simple but powerful. Don't wait for the world to change, become the force that changes it. The future has never belonged to those who sit quietly and accept what they are given. It has always belonged to those who dare to imagine more and refuse to settle for less. Every generation reaches a moment when it must decide whether to continue surviving inside a broken system or to stand up and create a better one. That moment is now. Around the world, and especially in countries like New Zealand, people are waking up to a harsh truth. The promises of endless growth, prosperity, and fairness under capitalism have not been kept. The economy keeps growing, but so does inequality. Productivity rises, but wages do not. The system demands that people work harder, longer, and faster, yet offers them less stability and dignity in return. When that contradiction becomes unbearable, it is not despair that follows, it is transformation. The hook is this: as those who refuse to accept the limits of a failing system become the architects of a new one. Progress has never been born from contentment. It comes from dissatisfaction, from people who are unwilling to be told that their struggle is inevitable. The same courage that fueled revolutions, civil rights movements, and democratic breakthroughs throughout history is the same courage that must be summoned today. The belief that things can be different is it is the starting point of every great human achievement. In New Zealand, the cracks in the economic foundation are visible to anyone willing to look. Skyrocketing rents, rising household debt, unaffordable health care, and an economy that rewards speculation more than work. These are not isolated problems. They are symptoms of a deeper sickness, a system that measures success in profit margins instead of human well-being. Yet this crisis, painful as it is, carries within it a profound opportunity. When old systems fail, they create the space for new visions to emerge. The challenge is not merely to fix what is broken, but to build something fundamentally better, an economy that serves people rather than exploiting them. There is power in refusing to settle for less, settling. For less means accepting jobs that don't pay a living wage, housing that drains entire paychecks, and political leaders who tell us that reform takes time while inequality grows by the day. Settling for less means believing that your voice doesn't matter, that your ideas are unrealistic, that things have always been this way and always will be. But every time in history when people have accepted those lies, progress has stalled. And every time they have rejected them, progress has soared. The abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, labor rights, social welfare, these victories were not gifts from the powerful. They were demands from the people who refused to settle. Here's another hook worth remembering. As resistance is not rebellion, it's responsibility. When you see injustice, when you feel the weight of a system that grinds people down for profit, doing nothing is not neutrality. It's participation in that system's survival. Refusing to settle for less is not an act of anger. It's an act of care for yourself, for your community, and for the generations to come. The most powerful revolutions begin not in the streets, but in the mind, the moment someone looks at the world and says, "This is not enough." That sentence is the seed of every future victory. We must redefine what the future even means. For too long, the future has been sold as a product, something determined by markets, technology, and the decisions of a privileged few. But the real future is not waiting for us. It's being written by us right now through our actions, our values, and our willingness to challenge what is unjust. The next era of prosperity will not be defined by billionaires or political slogans. It will be defined by how courageously ordinary people reclaim control over their work, their environment, and their democracy. When you stop settling, you start imagining. An imagination contrary to what the powerful might tell you is not weakness, it's strength. Every social transformation began as an idea someone was told was impossible. The 8-hour workday was once unrealistic. Universal health care was once radical. Workers owning their companies was once utopian. And yet every one of these ideas, once fought for and realized, became common sense. What is impossible today is simply what the powerful haven't yet been forced to accept. The future belongs to those who see beyond the immediate chaos and dare to shape what comes next. Those who settle will inherit the world as it is. Those who refuse will create the world as it should be. So the real choice facing New Zealand and indeed the world is not between stability and collapse, but between submission and transformation. The question is not whether change will come. It's whether we will have the courage to shape it. The future will not be written by those who wait. It will be written by those who act, imagine, and persist until justice is no longer an aspiration but a reality. So when we say New Zealand's economy is crashing, let's not be fooled into thinking it's a natural disaster like an earthquake or a storm. This is a man-made collapse designed by decades of policies that put profit before people. The good news, what's made by human hands can also be changed by them. Thank you for watching.